Dawn on the 5th of June 1944 found the invasion fleet already churning in the Channel, only to be ordered back. A Scot with charts and a quiet voice had persuaded a supreme commander to gamble everything on the weather. Meteorologist James Stagg warned of a narrow window, winds easing, cloud ceilings lifting, swell marginal, but survivable. A pause now might push the invasion weeks, even months into the future, handing the initiative back to Berlin. In a room at Southwick House, surrounded by maps of the French coast from Cherbourg to Le Havre, General Dwight D. Eisenhower listened. The plan, Operation Overlord, hung on logistics and tide tables as much as on courage. He asked the question only a commander can ask. If we go, what happens to the men in those boats if the sea does not play along? Stagg's answer was cautious, probabilistic, and, crucially, credible. Shortly after midnight, Eisenhower chose the 6th of June. The stakes were not abstract. The Allied timetable synchronized tide, moon, and daylight, with a choreography of naval gunfire, air bombardment, and the movement of thousands of landing craft. On the far side of the Channel, German coastal batteries sat behind concrete and steel, while armored reserves waited for permission that might never come. For the men in the fleet, the order translated into simple rituals: waterproofing rifles, checking life belts, taping dog tags. In mess decks and hangars, chaplains offered words, some formal, most whispered. On airfields from southern England to Wodge-born pilots now serving in the RAF, crews prepared pathfinders and transports. A weather window is not a guarantee. It is a bet placed under pressure. And with that bet, the largest amphibious assault in history began to move from plan to reality. The story you are about to hear contains combat violence and loss of life. We present it to honor victims and to understand causes and consequences. At 4:15 a.m., a simple message confirmed the decision. Okay, let's go. In that phrase, one hears not bravado, but acceptance, of uncertainty, of duty, of the countless small failures and recoveries that any plan this complex must endure. D-Day was not a single blow. It was an alignment of thousands of moving parts, ships, aircraft, tides, schedules, and human wills, seeking a fragile coherence on a hostile shore. The code name for the seaborne arm of Overlord was Neptune, a logistics symphony set to the metronome of the tide. Over 5,000 vessels, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, minesweepers, tugs, and an armada of landing craft formed the largest fleet ever assembled. The point was not grandeur, it was throughput. Engineers had rehearsed how to turn ships into bridges and beaches into ports. LSTs carried tanks and trucks. LCTs shuttled assault teams. Duplex-drive Shermans were meant to swim the last kilometers, sometimes into seas that would not forgive optimism. Fire support plans mapped every H-wrong point, wider stands nest, with call signs and time on target schedules. On paper, each minute had a job. In reality, chaos would edit the script. To the soldiers in the first waves, Neptune was experienced as weight. Packs soaked with salt water, Bangalore torpedoes cutting lanes through wire, ladders and grapnels for seawalls. Sappers and naval beach parties carried colored panels for air recognition and signal lamps for the landing craft that followed. The most delicate promise of Neptune lay beyond the first day. Temporary harbors called Mulberries and a pipeline named PLUTO to feed fuel across the Channel. Victory would require not just seizing ground, but sustaining it, hour after hour, ship after ship. In the darkness, just after 1944's Usisksof, pathfinders jumped to mark zones with radio beacons, Rebecca to Eureka, dots seeking their dashes, crosswinds, flak, and confusion, scattered sticks of paratroopers across the hedgerow country. From a staff map, dispersion reads like failure. On the ground, it often became opportunity. Small groups seized crossroads, blew culverts, and sowed doubt. French resistance cells, trained by SOE, supplied by air, cut telephone lines and guided men through orchards and lanes whose names never made it into the orders. At the Orne, glider troops landed almost on top of their bridges, a feat of night navigation and steel nerves. Elsewhere, wrong fields became right objectives. A battery silenced here, a roadblock thrown there. D-Day's airborne story is not a tidy arc, but a constellation, points of light, whose pattern only appears by morning. Bombardment promised to turn strong points into rubble, but clouds and fear of short drops pushed many bombers to release late. On some beaches, craters pocked the wrong side of the seawall. On others, naval shells cut firing slits to silence. Fire plans were mathematical, time-on-target sequences, lift and shift tables. Yet the battlefield is an editor. When smoke thickened and coordinates blurred, destroyers closed to within a few hundred meters, firing over open sights. Success varied by geometry. Where bluffs masked targets, guns survived. Where angles favored plunging fire, pillboxes cracked. Understanding D-Day means accepting that the bombardment was not one thing, but many, beach by beach, minute by minute. Currents nudged the first waves at Utah, nearly 2 kilometers south of Plan. The beach was less defended there. Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr., cane in hand, looked around and said the line that became a method. "We'll start the war from right here." Engineers cleared lanes, and troops pushed inland toward the causeways through flooded lowlands. The objective was not a strip of sand, but exits, paths off the beach into the bocage. By midday, units joined with paratroopers who had been fighting since nightfall. Utah shows how initiative, anchored in intent rather than grid squares, turns drift into direction. Omaha has become a synecdoche for D-Day, its surf stained by failure and perseverance. Bombers, seeking to avoid friendly fire into landing craft, released late. Craters fell mostly inland, leaving beach obstacles intact. Current and smoke pushed waves of men off their intended sectors. Duplex drive tanks foundered in rough water. On the bluffs, German strongpoints like WN-62 and WN-72 survived the bombardment. Machine guns and mortars cross-stitched the tidal flat. The plan dissolved into dozens of small fights. The story turns not on heroics alone, but on adaptation. Junior leaders clustering survivors, sappers blowing gaps, sailors turning their craft into impromptu gun platforms, naval gunfire officers called in destroyers to fire at near point-blank range, their shells cutting paths up the draws. By afternoon, the beach was still lethal, but momentum had shifted. A toehold became a line became a breach. On the eastern beaches, Gold, Juno, and Sword, specialized armor turned engineering problems into solvable tasks. Flail tanks beat mines into detonation. AVREs lobbed petard charges into concrete. Canadian units at Juno fought through seaside towns under sniper fire and sudden counterattacks. To the east, British troops at Sword pushed towards Caen, only to meet armored probes from 21st Panzer Division. The day became a balance. Clear lanes, expand lodgements, blunt riposts. Success here looked less like a breakthrough and more like a widening seam, measured in exits and village crossroads captured before dusk. 6 gliders, moonlit fields, and a pair of bridges whose capture would seal the eastern flank. Major John Howard's company slammed into Normandy with the precision of a thrown dart. The assault lasted minutes. The influence, hours and days. With the Orne bridges held, German armor could not easily roll into Sword's rear. Paratroopers and commandos linked up by morning, turning a daring raid into a hinge that shaped the battlefield's geometry. Behind every assault stood a moving hospital. Corpsmen pulled men out of the surf. Aid posts stabilized with morphine and tourniquets. beach evacuation points triaged by color tag. LSTs with surgical teams turned steel decks into operating theaters, while hospital ships took the most fragile cases across the channel. Survival multiplied when steps connected, hemorrhage controlled early, airways secured, evacuation lanes kept open despite shelling and tide. War is destruction. Medicine in war is logistics under fire. While soldiers fought for meters of sand, another battle ran in wavelengths and rumors. Fortitude fed Berlin a steady diet of plausible lies. A phantom army in southeast England, radio traffic to match, and agents who confirmed what German planners already feared, an attack at Pas-de-Calais. Ultra did not script D-Day, but it pried open windows, insight into order of battle, hints at fuel and readiness, the cautions of commanders wary of committing too soon. The effect, and it was cumulative. When reports from Normandy arrived, they were weighed against an expectation of a larger blow elsewhere. Delay was the intended product. The first day's victory would collapse without a second day's supplies. Engineers assemble Mulberry harbors from concrete caissons and floating roadways, ports that sailed. Fuel, the quiet master of operations, flowed through PLUTO, a pipeline from Britain to France. A mid-June storm wrecked the American Mulberry at Omaha, but the British harbor at Arromanches endured, and the beach unloading machine adapted. Logistics bent, it did not break. By nightfall, 5 beaches existed as one lodgment, stitched by exits, held by artillery, and patrolled by tired men who were now veterans. Losses were heavy, on Omaha grievous, but the line held and expanded. A day cannot win a campaign, yet it can make one possible. D-Day's measure is not only kilometers gained, but systems begun. Supply over open beaches, command posts functioning under fire, and a rhythm of reinforcement that the defenders could not match. Popular memory seeks a lever, a single cause that moved the world. Historians find a mosaic. Weather opened a window, but did not steer a boat. Deception delayed reserves, but did not empty the trenches. Courage mattered, yet without engineers and destroyers close in, Omaha might have failed. The honest answer to what decided D-Day is plural. Windows exploited, errors absorbed, local brilliance compounded, not destiny, but design meeting improvisation under pressure. As quiet returned in patches, men took out pencils. They wrote about sand in their boots, friends missing from the roll, the taste of tea brewed behind a dune. Some lines never crossed the channel, others did, folded and kept for years. Memory edits, but it also preserves. To read these voices is to recognize that D-Day's importance is measured not only in maps, but in lives altered, the saved, the lost, and the generations that followed.